Okay, welcome back, everyone, to the Mid-Atlantic Virtual Cybersecurity Forum. It is now time for our final presentation of the day and of the program. Cybersecurity Readiness Measurements, what you should know so you can engage with cyber vendors more efficiently. As a reminder, if you would like to submit a question to our panelists, please utilize the chat functionality within the Zoom platform. We will do our very best to get to all of the audience questions during this presentation today. And at this point now, I would love to welcome onto the virtual stage Rajiv Leventhal, our managing editor, to formally kick off this closing presentation. So Rajiv, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Great, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm really excited to introduce our expert speakers and close what's been an awesome day of insightful learning as it relates to cybersecurity. We're going to talk for the next 45 minutes or so about cybersecurity readiness measurements and what you need to know so you can engage with your cyber vendors more efficiently. I'm delighted to be joined here by Adam Gale, who's the president of KLAS Research, a Utah-based research and consulting firm in the healthcare industry, and Ed Goddard, who's a CEO of Sensinet. Adam and Ed, I will kick it to you guys.
Great. Thanks, Rajiv. It's a pleasure to be here today, and it will be even a bigger pleasure when we see all of you in 3D at some point. But it's great to be able to at least keep the world moving here. And my goal today is just to share some of our thinking on how we nudge some collaboration together on this cybersecurity front, and how KLAS's initial roots have led us to where we are today. And then Ed will be our real expert on the security side, but let me at least kick off. We KLAS started about 25 years ago, and I want to give just a quick summary of how that happened, just so you can see where we're pointed today. Kent, who is the K in KLAS, was working for one of the major HIT firms at that point, and the discussion that they were having was, how do we they're about to go public. How do we save some money, and how do we drive revenues up as best we can to make the numbers look as good as they can as we prepare to go public? And so as he sat in this meeting, he thought, are we really having a discussion about how much worse we can be on purpose, and hoping that no one would notice until after the IPO, and then they could rearrange things if they needed to and make things back to normal? But the fact that he had been one of the sales leads selling customers on the fact that, look, we have good software, but we have a phenomenal support, and we're going to help you be successful. He could just see that cutting those people would lead to lots of promises that would be missed. So if you think about it, the goal at that point was to figure out, how do we best measure vendor performance? And it was pretty obvious at that time, when we asked the question, who has the knowledge that would be able to answer that question of how folks were really doing, would be the customer. So if you went and asked the vendors how they were doing, or auditors or others, they would give you some kind of story. But if you went to the actual customers that had experience, you'd get the, let's just say, the truth. You'd get the real unvarnished truth of how things were going. And if you think about it, the challenge at that point was that it was tough to get the data in an organized way. It wouldn't have been surprising back 25 years ago to get a reference or two from whatever vendor you were working with. You would go call them, but you would also know that it would be their very best sites. So you're going to get to hear what is the very best, and not maybe what is the normal experience that I would expect to have. And this led to our traditional best-in-class rankings. So fast forward to 2020. What does this look like? Well, we are sitting with a group of CISOs. And so instead of a group of CIOs that were pushing us, this is now CISOs, and talking about what was frustrating to them. We were trying to get a read on how, or they were trying to get a read on how their technology partners were really doing on the cybersecurity front. And the painful part to them was it felt like they had to request a spreadsheet or craft a spreadsheet, send it to each one of their vendors separately, especially those they were looking at partnering with, and getting back a hodgepodge of answers that were pretty tough to decipher sometimes, and especially tough to compare side by side the responses from the different vendors. And so the request from them was, they asked a simple question: how can we, as a community, work together to really understand cyber preparedness. And if you go back to the earlier question on when KLAS was formed, who has this knowledge? Well, if you ask that question, the customers really don't. Like they have some view into how their vendors are doing. They have some sense of how prepared they are, but unless they've had some kind of cyber incident, they really don't have a great sense of how their vendors are doing. You could look at auditors. They have a kind of a broad sense of what's happened. And oddly enough, we actually went and wondered what would happen if you could somehow figure out from the hackers themselves which of these systems are most bulletproof. It's kind of like going to the thieves that are about to rob your house and find out, okay, what opening are you looking for? But as fun as it was to think about, we couldn't find a realistic way to approach it that way. So ultimately we thought, well, the vendors themselves actually have probably one of the best views into what they've done on the cybersecurity front, how they've closed some of the doors, and give feedback on how it compares ultimately to the benchmark. So we knew that would take some organization and a framework, and that's where we've ended up today. So one quick visual that I think helps me, on the left is a single tree just out in a big field that you can see has a pretty significant leaning based on years of wind, rain, and just getting battered. And it's pretty difficult to stand as a single tree. You look at this other group of aspens and how the aspens actually protect each other from the wind, from the rain, and you see that these aspens are fairly straight. They would not be if there was just a single aspen likely out in that same field. But what's been surprising to us is that it feels like the bad guys seem to be working together more than I would have expected. And I don't think have quite caught up in collaborating to help get information distributed out on how to best A, work with vendors that are prepared, and B, fill the gaps. Just how do we close some of those windows that someone might sneak in? So as we thought about this, we thought first, KLAS was not the company that would be the security expert. So we would need someone to work with that really understood this space. But what we would need is a way for vendors to accurately and consistently report on what they've done. And it would have to be, we said at the beginning, almost free. And we've changed that mentality to free. It needs to be free for a vendor to report and compare to the benchmark, just to make sure there's no barriers to participation, that we can really have a real vetting of all the vendors that are in our IT ecosystem. And then the last piece is we needed a reason for the vendors to participate and share information, which sometimes could be a little scary. Wondering how do we really compare to the benchmark. So think about it. It couldn't be pay to play. It needed to be simple. It needed to be accurate, and there needed to be some healthy pressure for participation. So the last piece there of the pressure to participate, we feel like is really up to the industry. KLAS and Sensinet working together will put this information out there, but it will only be impactful if every vendor feels like they have to participate and have to be on the radar with a security score. And obviously, having kicked this off now just a couple of months ago, we're very early in that ball game. But let me share just quickly from our KLAS standpoint, why did we pick Sensinet as a partner? Again, we knew that we didn't have the security expertise to do this ourselves. We feel like we're a great measurement firm. We understand a lot of the spaces now that we've been in, especially for several years. Security is so nuanced that we knew we needed a partner. So we went out to the market and looked at who the providers had faith in. So pretty quickly, we needed someone that had real results, had secure data, would be a great partner, and that really understood healthcare. There were a number of firms that I think that had broad expertise, but really wanted somebody that could speak the language, if you will, and do it without an accent. So someone who could really just speak security. And Sensinet came up from our provider partners as the leader that we would want to partner with in that space. And we found that those providers we talked to were spot on. that Sensinet can be 100% trusted with a methodology that's real, data that's secure, and a track record of working with people. So they also provided something that was very unique, which is a methodology to do this where we could do it together at no cost to the vendors, meaning they could have their assessment done. There wouldn't be a cost for that, and there would be opportunity, obviously, to do more with the system, but at least an initial measurement that didn't have any cost. So let me just tag you, Ed, for a minute here to introduce yourself. I guess I've said enough about you. Let me just let you take the mic here.
Thanks, Adam. And thanks everyone for joining the presentation. I'm happy to be here today. Thanks for all the kind words, Adam, about Sensinet. We were equally excited about the opportunity to partner with KLAS, and what got me really excited about it when Adam called was, after talking for about 15 minutes, it became very clear that we shared a similar vision, and this notion of you don't have to go it alone. And for so many years, and speaking from the vendor side, who had gone through hundreds of risk assessments for several products over over a decade or more, and having the scars to prove it and the pain of going through those assessments, I realized as a software product executive that there had to be a better way to manage this. And I looked at what was out there at the time, and for the most part, the industry was based on spreadsheets. We, as an industry, we're forcing folks to answer questions that were in a spreadsheet, combining those with a series of phone calls and emails, and so you've got not only this inefficient process and technical approach, but you've got data sprawl as well. So we never were able to, as a vendor, as a third party provider of software and solutions to health systems, really get leverage, really get ahead of the game. So we took that problem set and explored it with a bunch of providers as well, and equally they were frustrated with the inefficiencies in the process. And so this idea of putting together a two-sided network or a marketplace that would enable a much more efficient process that also began to disrupt the economics of the process as well. So not only were we solving the technical issues and challenges around the process, but I also believe that it was important to really look at the economics of the solution too, and how much it was costing providers to do a single assessment, and how many folks internally it was taking for the providers to manage a handful or a certain percentage of their overall vendor population and product population. It became very clear that people couldn't cover the number of products and services that they had, but they really wanted to. And so this idea of automating the workflows and streamlining the workflows and putting it onto a platform that in some ways, took a page out of the Amazon playbook and took a page out of the DevOps and the Secure Ops playbooks to really consolidate this functionality on a single platform. That
Hey, Ed, can I butt in here?
Yeah,
just
yeah.
to throw one thing in. So I've been surprised. So obviously the providers wanted to figure out how to have a more consistent way to understand this space. I've been surprised that even over the last month, I've had several vendors say to us, look, KLAS, can you help us on this front? We're getting bombarded with the spreadsheets that you just described.
Mhm.
That there's hundreds of spreadsheets coming from customers and potential customers. They all ask different but similar questions in different ways that they have to go manually fill out. And they were asking for some sensible solution to aggregate this in a workflow that just didn't take tons of people hours. So it's fascinating that both sides of the coin are getting tired of just the manual process that exists here.
Exactly. And this enables, again, for us to really realize this shared vision of enabling the right sets of behaviors and the right level of transparency that's needed in the industry to drive down risk. And I think that's when Adam, and I was able to hear the same words come out of Adam's mouth, and the KLAS team, I was really excited about the partnership because I felt like okay, the combination of these two things, is exponential in terms of the value we can provide together to the industry. So maybe if we go to the next slide, talk more. Yeah, and this level of transparency and this level of automation enables us to start doing some interesting things. And so where we're taking this industry, this capability is not only doing this point in time assessment of risk, but doing it when a product is purchased and delivered out of the box, when it's actually implemented and configured to the scope and use cases of the organization. We're looking at the different pieces if you're a medical device, so enabling the software bill of materials to actually be visible and to be risk rated, being able to do reassessments on a regular basis across all of your vendors, not just your critical or high vendors, because oftentimes, we like to say risk won't discriminate. It's going to find its weakest link in, and that can typically be the long tail of your vendor community. It may not be those critical and high vendors like an Epic or like a Cerner that are very mature in terms of their security processes and procedures overall. So next slide, Adam. And this shared vision, just got more interesting over the last couple of weeks with the executive order that was delivered by the White House. I mean, for me, when I saw that, I immediately harkened back to ARA and high tech and meaningful use and the impact it had, not only for the EMR vendors, but for the industry on whole, and how it really did a forklift upgrade for in terms of how care was delivered. We took, obviously it was really incentives to drive providers off of paper and onto electronic systems, and that did that did so much for the industry that I see similar aspects of what's happening with the executive order. And again, we think this is the first stroke of putting real focus and investments now in cybersecurity across the nation, and at a sector level as well. So we're excited about what the White House has been doing, what the administration's doing, and how that will trickle down into the other sectors, specifically the healthcare sector with HHS, with the work that NIST is doing around their standard work, not only for cybersecurity, but also for supply chain risk management as well. You get on the next slide.
Yeah, so let me jump in just to the early efforts here between KLAS and Sensinet and what that looks like. And this is part of the fun for me is who jumps in, what do they look like as we start to measure? And I'd like to be as transparent as I can on this. So we went and invited all 424 vendors that KLAS measures to participate. And it's kind of funny if you could picture someone sitting at their computer, getting this invitation from KLAS saying, how would you like to be a beta test on getting rated on how prepared you are for a security incident? And I can just imagine some immediately just went delete and said, that's not something I want to play around with. But I can imagine a few different storylines there. The first, I can imagine that some were skeptical that there could even be a solid methodology that would work. I picture some sitting there petrified at getting a grade on their security preparedness because it's really fairly tough to know how prepared you are. And I think some recognize that they're behind the curve of where they'd like to be, especially behind some of these mature vendors. And then funny enough, I like to imagine there's some that never got the email because it was gobbled up by their filter that now seems to be about DEFCON 5 in blocking messages that come in. And we've just seen a lot of that. Just feels like a higher level of filtering in the whole space because of some of the security issues, the phishing issues. I just got a text yesterday morning that said, Adam, I'll get those gift cards to you right away that you requested. And, they did it sort of tongue in cheek just because there are so many of these funny urgent requests from the CEO that they figured out and do a lot of things that direction, but a lot of damage can be done. So just to continue with this, we invited 424, 33 of those vendors jumped in. and said, look, we'd like to do the assessment. We'd like to see where we fit. We're excited to see where our gaps are. And you can see a list here of those companies that have jumped in. And there are a lot of solutions represented by these 33 vendors. And more interesting, maybe even than that, was after these 33 did the assessment, there were 7 who said, you know, I think I'd like to just hold off on showing the world our data because it doesn't look as good as we thought it would look. And that is totally understandable. That's not how we run things on the performance side, meaning when your customers have spoken, they've spoken. But on this front, we are letting people see where their gaps are, letting them improve. And then over time, I think the pressure from the industry, including from you as providers, will help people feel like they have to be on the scoreboard with whatever their security score is. So let me share with you what some of those early results looked like. And I think you'll find this interesting. There were 26 of those 33 vendors that stayed in. And over here on half of the slide, you can see what they look like. Very few of those red shields that say they're immature. There are some that say they're maturing in a space, especially with their threat and incident response. But most of the vendors that raised their hands, not surprisingly, are mature in this security space. Now, I'd like you to just picture what this chart would look like if we included all of those 400 vendors. There would be a lot of yellow with maturing and a lot of red with immature. And how do we know that? If you look at just this little sliver on the side of the slide here of what were the measurements for the vendors that decided not to have their data published? You can see a lot more of those red shields, a lot more of the yellow maturing status shields. And we just know as an industry, we have a long ways to go. We have chosen to start with a carrot rather than a stick to reward those vendors that have chosen to be courageous and jump in. And we know it takes a lot of courage to go put your neck out and be measured on that security front. But we hope as providers that we'll give extra attention to those vendors who are courageous enough to share where they are on the security front. And again, give the rest of the market a chance to get ready and get on the radar. So what do we picture happens next? Well, we know there are some vendors literally that don't know about it yet. They're going to continue to get the opportunity to participate. That could be if there's enough spam filters, we're going to call everyone, and we're in the process of doing that. There are some who feel like the methodology is poor, and one of the great things is some of the vendors who have been the toughest on that have wrestled with us and with Ed and his team, and I think have come to feel like, okay, there is a good process. There's some flexibility in the process. If a vendor has solved a problem in a unique way, rather than just saying, nope, they don't do that, saying, oh, that's a unique way to have solved it. And we feel like that's going to be effective. So there is a little bit of a manual piece there when there is a question mark on a certain way of measuring. I'm sure there are some vendors who feel like it's too taxing to participate. Through COVID, there were either vendors that were not busy and laying people off, or vendors that were so overtaxed because they had some kind of virtual solution that we recognize that was also a challenge. And we know several of those vendors will participate now that it feels like there's just a little bit of breathing room. But more than anything, I think there's just a group that doesn't feel ready for the scrutiny. It is a scary question to be asked, are you ready for a security attack? And I just picture someone, if they came to my own door at my own home and said, Adam, we're going to grade you on how prepared you are for some kind of theft at your house or someone breaking into your home, I would not feel prepared. And in fact, some of you have probably seen my presentation on the bike that got stolen from our garage and the video that we have of the person stealing the bike from the garage, which was not exceptionally helpful because it didn't keep the bike in the garage, but it did make us feel better. Anyway, we did get that bike back, but I know that I would not personally be ready for the scrutiny of an audit there. But just know that we are working to alleviate as many of those concerns as we can and encouraging as many vendors to participate as we can. So that flywheel has to be picking up energy. We have we just published this data online recently, and immediately several vendors raised their hands and said, okay, we're ready to go. We somehow missed this, or we feel like we're prepared. And so we can see the flywheel again continuing to move. And again, we hope as providers that you'll put just a healthy pressure on the market for everyone to go participate. So who pushes this flywheel? Certainly KLAS, certainly Sensinet, but the most meaningful pushing of this flywheel is healthcare leaders who just are sick and tired of working in this spreadsheet land without kind of a sincere baseline. So Ed, let me tag you here for this next slide.
Yeah, I'll just say this is complex. What we're doing, what we're attempting to do in the industry, and you know, there's a lot of detractors out there. I remember we first started this. Vendors would say, "There's no way you're going to be able to pull this off," but this vision of doing the right thing and what's needed for the industry is so powerful. And the longer we stay at it, and the more we learn from it, and the more again we flex as we learn. It's really encouraging other vendors, as Adam said, to come on board and join. And it's more than just software vendors. We're getting medical device vendors. We're getting those that are maybe non-technical, but that offer operational impact to a supply chain for a particular provider. They're also interested in this program longer term. There's a lot of things we're thinking about that could extend into other areas like API management as well. And so I wouldn't want to be a CISO in a health system today. Her job is one of the toughest jobs out there. There's a lot of masters that she has to support. There's limited resources. There are limited people to do the job and to do the task at hand. Remember prior to March of 2020, everybody was sort of in the office. Imagine March 15th, you've got to then prepare for everyone being remote. I mean, the job just gets harder and harder. And the number of devices, the number of third parties, the number of vendors, number of software, the components that are running a health system today are 100 times what they were 10 years ago. And the attackers have a greater attack surface, and they themselves have tools that they're leveraging. And as Adam said, they're working together. So we as an industry, we can't rest. We have to collaborate. We have to work together. We're at the top of the first inning on this journey. There's a lot of work to do. And we're looking forward to more vendors joining the program, more providers supporting and advocating for the program as well. So part and parcel with the executive order, the KLAS team and the Sensinet team got together and started to formulate a joint strategic plan that could extend beyond the cyber transparency program that we've talked about. So we'll be working on more ways to introduce standards into the industry that are greatly needed. Work with existing programs and task groups and working groups that are part of things like NIST and the NTIA and others, as well as we again begin to really tackle the issues that are out there. And part of that challenge is we've got to work on and work towards true interoperability standards where we can start to share this data in a much more frictionless way. It's really difficult to share things even like vulnerability data, many different formats that exist today. So we've got a lot of work to do. Again, we're probably, like I said, it's top of the first, very similar to 2009, 2010 in the, in the world of meaningful use and EMR adoption. So we're looking forward to it. So
Do you want me to take this last one, Ed, here?
Sure. Yeah, you want to wrap it up? Perfect.
Great. Well, just one of the things that while you were talking, Ed, that I thought about was the fact that these CISOs feel a little bit like Chicken Little, at least is how they've described it to me. They're the one that always has to say, hey, the sky is falling and let's be really careful. And they said one of the challenges is not having data behind that to be able to help back them up with their executives, just proving, hey, where are the vulnerabilities? And when somebody says, hey, let's just plug in this new system that we're really excited about, how can the CISO not just feel like they're always the one claiming the sky is falling? How can they just go look at a data-based methodology to help them know what the safety level is for their organization? So it's really an interesting thing. But I think the goal at the end of the day is this has to be a community effort. If this is just KLAS or just Sensinet or just you as providers or as CISOs working on this, it is not going to come together. We have to figure out how do we coordinate, collaborate, and be better collaborators than the bad guys as they work on this. And just know that Ed and I are really open to feedback on this. How can we best help you in the measurements and in the security you're trying to create for your own organization? We are all ears. As like Ed said, we're still in the first inning, and there can be a lot of changes to this game as we go here. So I think if we can leverage the transparency to drive the adoption of controls for these healthcare vendors and for the organizations they serve, that's going to be a big piece of this. And then ultimately just have widespread information sharing to have that transparency of where we really are. And if you're working with a vendor that's not prepared, there'll just be a healthy opportunity for them to just raise the bar. And it's not like this is a black box. Like no one can know what the things are they need to do. I think Ed showed that his team gives very clear next steps of where the gaps are and what could be improved. So I know we're highly energetic about where we are. I know we're enthusiastic about the opportunity to solve with you some of these challenges. And Rajiv, we'll just see if there are any questions from the audience today.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. And just a quick reminder, you can still use the chat to submit a question. It doesn't look like any have come in, but are any closing thoughts, or how about predictions for the future? You mentioned that we're in the first inning here. Looking at the next 12 to 24 months, what would you say will be top of mind from a focus area for both KLAS and its base, and of course Sensinet and its customers?
You want to hit that first, Ed?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Of course. Yeah. I think the more we engage with CIOs and CISOs, we learn a lot about the totality of their cybersecurity program. And oftentimes, if you think about what they're dealing with, they're not only dealing with cybersecurity from a technical perspective, but they're also dealing with cybersecurity across the business, across the enterprise. And so one thing that has to happen is cybersecurity, the management of risk and the management of obviously incidents and vulnerabilities, et cetera, has to move up the stack and has to be less of a silo and much more of a part of the business culture in healthcare and in any organization, quite frankly. And so what we're seeing is that in health systems, there are all these different silos of risk. You might have cybersecurity, you might have third-party vendor, you might have enterprise, you might have IRB, the Institutional Review Board, or the research. There could be M&A risk that you're looking at, you're acquiring another facility. So there's all these different pockets, and some report into the CIO and some report into the biomed group if it's a medical device. And so one of the things that has to happen is a normalization, a consolidation, and a coordination of risk across the enterprise. CISOs and CIOs and other leaders at the health system have got to take a step back and really think about how they transform cybersecurity and how they transform the management of risk across the enterprise. There's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained. The other thing I will say that I'm starting to hear from customers is that for those customers that have a really solid third-party risk program, they're up for renewal for their cybersecurity insurance. And as part of that renewal process, they're taking into account that third-party risk program and the maturity of it. And it's actually helping them either eliminate an increase in premium, um, or actually reducing premiums across the board at some level. And I think that's a really big, again, it's early days here, but I think uh, pushing on cyber insurance in a way that enables the investments at the business level to recognize that, if we're doing the right things internally, we're making the right investments, it can have a much greater impact on the overall organization. So I think that's an area that, we'll begin, or have begun to explore. But we think the data sets that are getting created now with tools like Sensinet, are leverageable within the context of insurance, and that's an area that we'll be looking at as well.
And let me just add one thing that comes to mind, Rajiv, as you asked that question. One of the things even before COVID that we were starting to be asked was the question around, look, Adam, we've bought our core EMR. We have a lot of our key pieces in place. But man, I get 500 emails, voicemails, texts a week as a healthcare IT executive from new players that are just emerging pieces and that do some cool whiz bang thing that I can barely even tell exactly what that is. And they said, can you shed any light on which of these makes sense to even pursue? Like, I can't go pursue 500, but I could go pursue, a few of these and just see where they would really take us. So we've launched an effort called our Emerging Technology Research that goes and looks at the first 5 customers or first 9 customers of some of these early players. And if you take that pre-COVID desire, throw COVID on where you essentially couldn't go try new things outside of an intense science project around virtual care and a lot of the other things around getting vaccines out, all of a sudden we're starting to see a lot of these providers start to try some of these new things that they were looking at 18 months ago. Well, many of them are trying to solve some new, pretty unique problem or solve an old problem in a unique way. And how do they combine solving that problem with making sure you don't have 500 new doors open into your health system that just create all kinds of vulnerabilities? So I think it's really interesting that now not only do you have to think about that with your existing players, but all the new things that people want to and need to plug in to innovate, we have to figure out how to make sure that we can close some of those security doors there with those players. So it's an incredibly fun time if you think about all the innovation we can do. And then it's a little scary to think of, like, again, how many doors that may open to your organization.
Yeah, and the stakes are higher too, right? It used to be 10 years ago, a data breach, was what really challenged everyone. Nowadays, with ransomware and other attacks, you can not only disrupt care, but you can actually, harm patients. And so patient safety and care disruption now are critical areas of concern and focus.
Yeah, care disruption for sure, of course. That's great insight from both of you. We did get one question here. Let's sneak it in before we sign off. An attendee said, I work for an association that provides resources and advocacy for more than 60 community health centers. How do you suggest convincing that many different organizations that cybersecurity is extremely important, even with resources that are limited, which of course is a problem across the country? And then also, how do you convince them that being transparent with their security and cybersecurity incidents will benefit the entire network?
Yeah, do you want me to take that, Adam?
Sure.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. The nice thing about the Cybersecurity Transparent program is that it really helps drive awareness towards the problem in a way that is suitable for a non-technical person to kind of get their mind around. So this notion of maturity, this notion of being prepared, is a pretty simple concept that we found as we were developing the data and the what we were going to actually provide visibility on. We found that people resonated to this idea of being, mature and prepared. So I think the first and foremost thing is there's an education process that, Adam and I have been doing and others have been doing as we take this out on the road. And I think over time, more of these organizations will hear about this as this picks up momentum. In terms of overall community hospitals, I think one of the things that they can do, and this individual can do, is put a program together that leverages the power of that community. I give you an example of that. In addition to working with KLAS, we also work with incubators. So these are investor communities like Cedars-Sinai has an incubation group, an accelerator where they fund entrepreneurs to create digital health solutions. And as part of that process, as that digital health entrepreneur is bringing their product to market, he or she has to create an assessment. They've got to go through this process. And oftentimes they have no idea what hits them until it hits them. And so we've been working with the incubators around the country, including Cedars, Mass Challenge Health Tech, KidsX, which is a 45 hospital pediatric system, to really educate those and work with those vendors on what it takes to develop a cybersecurity program and the types of investments they have to make, and to help them think about it as a roadmap. They're not gonna be able to fund everything overnight, but they can build a roadmap. And I remember as a vendor early on in the development of my product, many moons ago, we often would have the challenge of, well, I know you want this level of security, but we're not quite there yet. Here's our roadmap. And oftentimes that was good enough. As long as we were transparent and honest with the provider, and they could kind of manage that contractually, then it actually was, it worked. It's when we ran into trouble if we tried to, pull the wool over their eyes, right? If we tried to say, oh, we have this thing, but didn't really have it, right? Because ultimately you'd have to be responsible for delivering that at some point in time. So I think that education could be really helpful, and 60 community hospitals, they have that critical mass and they can drive that.
Yeah, and if I could just agree with Ed there. I mean, I think there's certainly a gamble that can happen. So some of these organizations will gamble and win. That feels like a dangerous strategy, to gamble and hope to win. I think the biggest challenge, like Ed just said, is they don't have the resource to go hire a CISO at every organization. And so how do you then leverage and work with some of these community groups to put a CISO together or some kind of strategy that you can leverage for all of those organizations, I think is really critical. But having some data to work from, as an executive where I have my own team coming to me saying, how much should we go put into security? Having some data really helps, because otherwise sometimes it just feels a little bit like a finger in the wind. So some education and some data just really helps to make a better decision. And we're hoping to just help with that decision-making process, to have some clarity around the tools that people are putting in.
Great. So with that, I think we can wrap up. That was a good question. And thanks so much for your insight, of course, throughout this whole presentation from both Adam from KLAS and Ed from Sensinet. We will kick it back to Matt Rayner to close our program for today. Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, Adam and Ed. A fantastic closing presentation for our Mid-Atlantic Virtual Cybersecurity Forum. I want to thank everyone who took the time to view the content today, and who took the time to view the content this whole week between the Mid-Atlantic Virtual Summit and the Mid-Atlantic Virtual Cybersecurity Forum. We hope you enjoyed the events this week. We're very excited to bring the Mid-Atlantic Summit and Cybersecurity Forum back in person to the city of Philadelphia in 2022. We will be in touch as soon as the dates are finalized. With that said, I wish you all a fantastic day, and we look forward to collaborating again as soon as possible. Thank you and take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.